You think you know what happens on a flight? Think again. What if I told you that behind the smiling faces and beverage carts, flight attendants are witnessing horrors that would make your stomach churn? Prepare to have your perception of air travel shattered as we dive into the chilling true nightmares they experience high above the clouds. Hello everyone. Thank you for watching. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. That way, YouTube will continue to show you more stories like this one. Alright, let's begin. I'll never forget the man on a red-eye flight from Los Angeles to New York. It was close to midnight when he boarded. At first glance, he looked like any ordinary passenger. Middle-aged, wearing a dark jacket, no carry-on luggage. But from the moment he sat down, I felt something was off. He didn't move. He didn't reach for a phone or a book. He didn't even close his eyes. He just sat there staring straight ahead. As the cabin lights dimmed and passengers tried to get comfortable, I started my usual walk through the aisle. That's when I noticed it. His eyes weren't on the seat back in front of him. They were on me. At first, I brushed it off. Passengers stare sometimes, especially when they're nervous flyers. But this wasn't nervous. Every time I passed, his eyes followed. I tried to avoid looking directly at him, but the weight of his stare was impossible to ignore. Hours went by like that. Every time I glanced in his direction, he was still watching me. Finally, I forced myself to look. His eyes were locked on mine, unblinking, and then I saw it. His lips were moving. At first, I thought he was muttering a prayer, but as I leaned closer, my stomach dropped. He was mouthing my name. I froze in the aisle. I hadn't told him my name. My name tag was tucked under my blazer, hidden. No one could have known. When our eyes met, his mouth curled into a slow, unnatural smile. My heart raced, and I quickly moved away, pretending to check on another passenger. The rest of the flight, I could feel him watching me no matter where I stood. When the flight finally landed, I waited for him to disembark. I wanted proof that he was real, that my mind hadn't imagined it, but he never came out. His seat was empty. Later, records showed that no one had even been assigned to that row. On another flight, a man in his 40s asked me politely for an extra blanket. It seemed harmless, the kind of request I get all the time. I handed it over without a second thought. Hours later, another passenger complained that the lavatory trash was overflowing. I went in to check, expecting the usual mess of tissues and cups. But buried deep inside the bin was the same blanket I had given out earlier. Only now it was wrapped tightly around something. I pulled it out and saw broken pieces of glass hidden inside, sharp enough to be used as a weapon. My hands shook as I carried it back. Someone had taken the time to hide it carefully. It wasn't an accident. It felt deliberate, like it had been placed there for a reason. I immediately checked his seat, but it was empty. At first, I thought he might be stretching his legs or in another lavatory, but he never came back. When we landed, I stood by the exit, scanning every passenger as they left. I never saw him. Security reviewed the footage later, but there was no clear image of him disembarking. To this day, I wonder what he had planned. Was it meant for himself? For another passenger? For us, the crew? I'll never know. But the experience that still makes my skin crawl happened on a flight to Chicago. A man boarded alone, quiet and polite. He asked for orange juice, thanked me when I handed it over, and spent the next hour reading a paperback novel. He seemed calm, like the kind of passenger every crew member hopes for. Then, without warning, everything changed. The book fell from his hands with a loud crack against the floor. He stood up, eyes wide, and screamed in a language none of us recognized. It wasn't the panicked shout of someone afraid of flying. It was guttural, raw, like something tearing out of him. The sound froze the cabin. Passengers screamed. Children began crying, and panic spread instantly. He clawed at his seatbelt, as if it were strangling him. His nails tore at his own shirt, leaving bloody scratches across his chest. We rushed to restrain him, but his strength was unreal. It took 3 of us, plus 2 passengers, to force him back into the seat. His body shook violently, his eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. He slumped forward, breathing heavily. His eyes cleared, and he looked around in confusion. He asked why everyone was staring at him. When we explained what had happened, he shook his head. He swore he didn't remember any of it. The rest of the flight was tense. Nobody spoke. Nobody slept. Every small creak of the cabin made people jump. When we landed, security escorted him away. None of us was told what happened after. Whether it was a breakdown, a medical episode, or something none of us could explain, we were left without answers. People often ask me what the hardest part of being a flight attendant is. They expect me to say the long hours, the jet lag, or the lack of sleep. But the truth is different. Once that cabin door closes, you're locked in with whoever or whatever boards that plane. Some people bring fear with them, some bring danger, and some, I believe, bring things that don't belong in this world at all. There are moments when you think you've seen everything, when nothing a passenger does could surprise you anymore. But the longer you work inside an airplane cabin, the more you realize the plane itself has its own secrets. One night, I was working a transatlantic flight. The lights were dimmed, most passengers asleep, the engines humming in the background. I pushed the drink cart quietly down the aisle. When I passed row 27, I noticed a man sitting by the window. He looked normal, middle-aged, neatly dressed, arms folded across his lap. I nodded politely and continued walking. A few minutes later, I came back through the aisle. His seat was empty. The blanket was still folded neatly, the headphones untouched, no sign that anyone had ever sat there. I stopped for a moment, confused. I checked the manifest. There was no one assigned to 27A. At first, I thought I was just tired, maybe imagining things. But then another attendant walked up behind me. She leaned close and whispered, "Did you see the man in 27A? He's gone." My stomach dropped. It wasn't just me. She had seen him too. That wasn't the only time. On another flight, I saw a woman in a bright red coat sitting near the emergency exit. She sat upright, her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. She didn't move or react when I passed. I made a note to offer her water later when the aisle was clear. But when I came back, her seat was empty. No bag, no coat, nothing left behind. I was unsettled, but what made it worse was when a passenger later asked why we were allowing a woman in red to stand in the aisle during turbulence. I didn't know what to say. I had seen her. Another passenger had seen her, but there was no one there. Sometimes it isn't people at all. Sometimes it's the sounds that get to you. The cabin can be perfectly quiet, most passengers asleep, when suddenly you hear banging from the galley. Metallic clanging like drawers slamming shut or trays rattling. The first few times I thought it was another attendant cleaning up, but when I went to check, the galley was empty. Every latch was locked, every cart sealed. One night, I opened a cart and found something that didn't belong. Inside was a small wooden figure, no bigger than my hand. It was carved into the shape of a face with hollow eyes. It wasn't part of the catering supplies. None of the other attendants recognized it. I set it aside, planning to hand it over to security after landing. But when I turned back a few minutes later, it was gone. Nobody admitted to touching it. I've heard faint voices too, late at night, coming from the empty galley. Sometimes it's just a few words. Other times it sounds like someone calling my name. The first time I followed the sound, convinced a passenger was lost or needed help. But when I got there, the galley was deserted. I told myself it was the engines playing tricks on my ears, but deep down I knew it wasn't. The incident that unsettled me the most happened on a short domestic flight. A young girl was sitting with her parents in row 14. She was cheerful, playing with her toys and chatting quietly. At one point, she asked her mother if she could go to the bathroom. Her mother told her to wait until the aisle was clear. Not even a minute later, the parents turned to check on her, and she was gone. The panic was immediate. The father shouted her name. The mother began crying, and soon the whole cabin was on edge. I ran down the aisle, checking each row, each lavatory, each galley. The captain made an announcement, asking everyone to stay calm. Passengers craned their necks. Some even lifted blankets to check under their seats. We couldn't find her. For several minutes it felt like the impossible had happened. I imagined her slipping past unnoticed, hiding somewhere dangerous. My heart raced as I pictured the worst. Then, without warning, she was back, sitting in her seat, calm, smiling. Her parents rushed to her, holding her tightly. They asked her where she had gone, but she looked confused. She said she had been sitting there the whole time. She didn't remember getting up. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe we overlooked her somehow. Maybe panic made us miss the obvious. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. We had searched everywhere. She hadn't been there. And then suddenly she was. After that flight, I couldn't look at the cabin the same way. Working on airplanes teaches you to ignore bumps in the night, to rationalize every strange noise or flicker of light. But there are some things you can't explain away. A seat that looks occupied, then isn't. A passenger who vanishes, then reappears. Voices calling from empty galleys. To this day, whenever I walk down a darkened aisle at night, I catch myself hesitating before looking too closely at the seats. Because sometimes on an airplane, what you think you see isn't really there, and sometimes what isn't supposed to be there is sitting quietly, waiting for you to notice. After years of working in the cabin, I realized the strangeness doesn't stop at the passengers. It doesn't even stay inside the cabin. Some of the most unsettling things happen below the plane, in the cargo hold, or high above us in the skies. One winter evening before boarding began, I spoke with a ground crew member. He looked pale, almost shaken. When I asked him what was wrong, he hesitated, then finally told me. Earlier that day, while unloading luggage, he had opened the cargo hold and found a coffin wedged between the bags. There was no paperwork for it, no mention on the manifest. Yet there it was, a sealed coffin, heavy and cold. He said they immediately called a supervisor, who then brought security. But when they returned, the coffin was gone. The bags were all accounted for. No gaps, no sign that anything had been removed. He told me the story with his hands shaking. He expected me to laugh, but I didn't. Because I'd seen enough in my own flights to know coffins don't just appear and disappear. That wasn't the only time strange cargo appeared. A mechanic once told me about a pre-flight check. He was inspecting a sealed container when he heard loud banging from the inside. He described it as fists pounding, frantic and desperate. He rushed to open it, expecting to find a stowaway. Another worker helped him pry it open. When they finally got the latch free, the noise stopped. Inside was nothing. The container was completely empty. He said even after it was open, he could still feel the vibration in his bones, like the sound had been real. There were also catering staff who swore they'd quit night shifts because of what they found. One described a crate filled with identical dolls. Each one had black painted eyes. The crate had no shipping label, no paperwork. When they asked the airline about it, nobody could explain where it had come from. By the next morning, the crate had disappeared. If that was what happened on the ground, what happened in the skies was worse. Most flight attendants get used to turbulence. Usually it's nothing more than a rough patch of air, but sometimes it feels different. Sometimes it feels intentional. On one flight from Denver to Seattle, the weather was clear. Radar showed no storms. The captain had even told us to expect a smooth ride. But midway through the flight, the plane dropped so suddenly that passengers lifted out of their seats. Oxygen masks fell, luggage crashed from the bins, and people screamed. I grabbed the nearest armrest, my heart pounding, trying to stay calm for the passengers. The shaking lasted almost 2 full minutes. Not normal bumps. The plane seemed to be yanked down, released, and then yanked again. I looked toward the cockpit, waiting for the captain's announcement, but the intercom stayed silent. When the turbulence finally stopped, the captain's voice came on. He sounded shaken. All he said was, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated." He didn't mention turbulence, didn't explain what had happened. Later, I overheard a co-pilot whisper to another crew member that the instruments had shown clear skies the whole time. His exact words were, "It felt like something invisible had grabbed us." And then there are the skies themselves. I've seen lightning stretch sideways across the horizon like a solid line of fire, even though there were no storm clouds. I've seen glowing orbs drift alongside the plane, keeping pace for several minutes before shooting off into the dark. Once on a red-eye over the Atlantic, I saw what looked like a face forming in the clouds outside my window, pale, enormous, with hollow eyes staring back. I blinked, and it was gone. But the memory has never left me. Still, nothing compares to what some of us call the passenger who doesn't belong. I saw it once, years ago. It was past midnight on a long-haul flight. Most passengers were asleep. The cabin was quiet, the lights dimmed. I went to the back to restock supplies. That's when I noticed a figure standing near the service door. At first I thought it was just another passenger, but something felt wrong immediately. The figure was too tall, too thin. Its arms hung in an unnatural way, like they didn't have joints. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there. I swallowed hard and whispered, "Sir, you need to return to your seat." The figure tilted its head slightly, as if studying me. I blinked, and in that instant, it was gone. I told myself it was exhaustion, a trick of the low light, but later that night another crew member pulled me aside. Her face was pale, her voice shaky. She asked, "Did you see the tall man in the back?" My blood ran cold. She described exactly what I had seen. We weren't the only ones. A passenger seated near the rear later asked why the tall man by the service door hadn't been told to sit down during turbulence. There had been no man, no record of anyone in those seats. Over the years, I've heard the same story from other colleagues. Different flights, different routes, same description. A tall, silent figure. Some say they've woken during the night to find it standing in the galley. Others claim to have seen it reflected in the cabin windows, even though no one was behind them. No one knows what it is. Some believe it's the spirit of a passenger lost in a crash, forever trapped between destinations. Others think it's something else entirely, something that doesn't belong to our world. All I know is that when you see it, you feel one thing. You were never supposed to notice it. Flying is supposed to feel routine. That's what passengers believe. But once you've seen coffins vanish, turbulence that feels like a hand dragging the plane down, faces in the clouds, and a figure that doesn't belong among the living, you realize the skies may look calm, but they are never truly empty.